What happens when an unexpected repair leads to an even more unexpected connection? When 60-year-old Margaret opens her door to a young handyman named Jacob, a spark ignites that awakens feelings she thought were long gone. As their professional relationship blurs into something more intimate, they find themselves caught in a whirlwind of desire and uncertainty. Will they embrace this thrilling moment, or will reality pull them apart? Join us on this captivating journey of passion, self-discovery, and the complexities of love. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more intriguing stories. It began like any other call. Just a simple fix, nothing out of the ordinary. At first, I didn't give it a second thought. I was 60, living by myself in a calm, uneventful world, untouched by passion or longing for more years than I cared to count. But that Wednesday, when Jacob walked into my home, young, confident, and carrying a nervous kind of charm, something shifted deep inside me. What started off as harmless quickly turned into something far more intense. Our early business-like meetings soon filled with an unspoken tension, and I found myself crossing lines I hadn't even known were there. I hadn't meant for it to happen, hadn't seen it coming, but it awakened something in me I could no longer push aside. I had been staring at the dripping faucet for days, watching water pool in the sink, an ongoing reminder of how much I overlooked my own space. After years of carefully planned renovations, the house now felt meaningless without someone else to enjoy it with. Since the divorce, it had all seemed too large, every room echoing with memories I tried not to revisit. The kitchen, once the heartbeat of our family, had slowly fallen into quiet neglect, just like me. So when the leak became too annoying to ignore, I did something I hadn't done in ages. I asked for help. I searched for a local handyman, Jacob. That name meant nothing at the time, just a person to handle the job. I expected someone older, maybe gruff and well-worn from years of experience. But when I opened the door that chilly Wednesday, I found myself facing a man in his 20s. He stood tall with a toolbox in hand, wearing a fitted grey shirt that clung to his broad chest. His nervous smile didn't quite reach his eyes, but there was something about him that pulled me in. "Hi, I'm here to look at the sink," he said, his voice deep yet gentle. I blinked, caught off guard by how my heart skipped ever so slightly in my chest. It was ridiculous. At my age, I wasn't supposed to feel those things anymore. And yet, there it was. A spark I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him pass. I watched him as he moved through the kitchen, his eyes quietly taking it all in. He worked with calm efficiency, kneeling to check the pipes, his hands sure and steady. I stayed close, pretending to keep myself busy at the island, but I couldn't look away. There was something about the way he moved, the strength in his arms as he tightened the fittings, the quiet focus on his face. I hadn't been near someone so young in years, hadn't let myself imagine what that might feel like, until now. I didn't fully understand it, but something inside me stirred. It wasn't just his looks, though. He was undeniably handsome in an easy, rugged way. It was his energy, his presence, a kind of life that stood in stark contrast to the stillness that had taken over mine. There was a warmth in him, a glow I hadn't felt in such a long time. At one point, I caught myself leaning on the counter watching him more intently than I should have. I tugged at my robe, a robe I'd never thought of as suggestive until that moment, and stood upright, trying to push away the thoughts slipping into my mind. Jacob looked up just then, our eyes meeting. I saw the quick flicker of surprise on his face as he glanced over me before returning to his work, cheeks faintly red, and I couldn't help but enjoy the rush of knowing I'd gotten a reaction. It was subtle, but I felt something stir, a desire I'd long buried. I walked over to where he was crouched, watching his focused hands work. There was a trace of unease in the way he moved, as if he didn't want to notice me too much. "Everything all right down there?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant. He nodded without looking up. "Yeah, just a small leak. I'll have it done soon." I couldn't resist. I reached out, my fingers gently resting on his shoulder. His body stiffened at the contact, and I felt a thrill knowing he'd noticed. You're pretty strong, I said, my tone a little more playful now. He looked up, surprised, his blush deepening. Thanks, he mumbled. I gave him a small, knowing smile, the tension between us growing thicker in the small kitchen. It was unspoken, but clear. He shifted, clearly trying to keep things professional, but the slight shake in his hands as he turned the last bolt gave him away. I moved closer, leaning on the counter, eyes never leaving him. He stood, wiping his hands, avoiding eye contact. Need a hand? I asked, though I knew he didn't. He shook his head too quickly, busying himself with his tools, though his fingers still trembled. I touched his arm this time, letting my fingers linger against his skin. He froze, and I saw the silent tug of war in his expression. He wanted to give in, I could feel it, but he was holding himself back. He was younger, and I should have known better too. But in that moment, none of it mattered. My hand stayed on his arm, the tension between us snapping like a live wire. His breathing hitched, eyes wide with uncertainty. For a second I thought he might step closer, bridge the gap between us. But then he backed away, breaking whatever spell had formed. "Mom," he said, voice shaking, "I'm just here to fix the sink." I smiled, amused at how flustered he'd become. "You sure there's nothing else that needs attention?" I teased. He looked torn, unsure whether to stay or flee. His hands shook as he picked up the last of his tools, clearly struggling to keep it together. I stepped in again, just inches from him now. "There's something else you could help me with," I whispered, my voice low and suggestive. He didn't answer, just stared at me, frozen. I leaned in like I might kiss him, but he quickly stepped back, lifting his hands slightly as if to keep space between us. "I can't," he said, shaking his head. "I really can't." I pouted, a little let down, but not surprised. He wasn't giving in, not yet, anyway. He left quickly, almost running, and I was alone in the kitchen once more. Still, the way he left, hurried and awkward, didn't just speak of discomfort. There was something else in the air, something unresolved. I could feel it. Jacob hadn't walked out because he wasn't interested. He'd left because he didn't trust himself not to say yes. The next few days were a strange mix of anticipation and tension. I couldn't stop thinking about him, how he'd hesitated, how his gaze had lingered, just a little too long. It had been far too long, years really, since I had experienced anything close to this, since I had truly felt anything. But now, all of a sudden, this young man had sparked something deep inside me, something I thought had disappeared forever. I didn't think I'd hear from him again. I assumed he had convinced himself not to return, that it was better to stay away. But then, around a week later, my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but when I picked up it was him. "Hey, it's Jacob, the plumber. Just wanted to check if everything's still good with the sink. Did the fix work out okay?" His tone was courteous, even professional, but I caught the slight shake in his voice. He was uneasy, and I found that more exciting than I wanted to admit. "Oh, Jacob," I answered, trying to sound relaxed, though I already knew where this was heading. "Funny you should call. The sink's working fine, but there's a small issue in the bathroom I hoped you might look at. Probably nothing big, but I figured it's best to have someone who knows what they're doing take a look." There was a beat of silence as he seemed to mull it over, trying to decide whether or not to return. "I can be there in about an hour," he finally replied. After ending the call, I couldn't help but smile. This time, I had no plan of letting things stay so polite. When Jacob showed up, the tension was obvious. He was more on edge than before, still trying to appear cool and capable, but I could tell from the way his shoulders were set and how carefully he avoided eye contact that he was nervous. I guided him upstairs to the bathroom. The faucet problem was minimal, just a loose handle, but I knew that wasn't the real reason he came. While he worked, I stood nearby, saying nothing, simply watching. The silence between us was thick with something unspoken, something that made my skin hum. He seemed more focused than last time, eyes locked on the task, head down, but I could feel how aware he was of my presence, how attuned he was to the closeness of the space. I couldn't keep it in any longer. "Jacob," I said gently, taking a step toward him, "I've been thinking about you." He froze briefly, his grip on the handle tightening. He didn't look up, but I noticed his knuckles whiten, his breathing grow a bit uneven. "You have?" he said carefully, as though unsure whether it was safe to go there. "I haven't been able to stop," I went on, my voice lower, more personal. "You seemed like you wanted something too, but you pulled back. Why?" He didn't reply right away. His hands kept adjusting the faucet, but his eyes gave him away. "I'm supposed to be professional," he finally said, almost too softly to hear. "It's not appropriate." "Is it really wrong?" I asked, moving even closer, feeling his warmth now. "You're an adult. So am I. We both sense this, don't we?" He finally looked up at me, his jaw set, eyes stormy with the same conflict I'd seen before. He was torn, trying so hard to keep things proper, but the moment had already gone too far. I wasn't about to walk it back now. I reached out, letting my fingers lightly touch his chest. I could feel the quick rhythm of his heart under my hand. He inhaled sharply, and for a second I thought he might retreat again. But then he suddenly took my arm and pulled me toward him. His grip was firm but not harsh. Our faces were so close I could feel his breath. "Margaret," he murmured, voice rough, "this isn't a game." "I never said it was," I answered with a slight smirk. His hands stayed on my arm, unsure, like he wasn't certain he could trust himself to let go. His face had lost that awkward, polite mask. Now it was just raw emotion and intensity. His eyes met mine, and the energy between us changed, deeper now, heavier. I leaned in, stopping just shy of his mouth, his fingers pressed into my arm as if torn between drawing me nearer or pushing me away. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he'd turn and leave forever. But then his breathing grew faster, and I knew we were both caught in the same pull. "Sometimes you just have to stop fighting it," I whispered, barely above a breath, but heavy with promise. He paused for a second longer, then, like something inside him gave way, he tugged me closer and kissed me. It wasn't careful or unsure like I imagined. It was fierce, full of everything we'd been keeping back. His lips were urgent against mine, and I shivered as his arms slid around my waist like he didn't dare let me go. I kissed him back, looping my arms around his shoulders, pulling him tighter. The world outside that moment disappeared. The bathroom, the leak, all of it gone. Only his hands, his mouth, the energy between us remained. His grip shifted lower, landing on my hips, and I felt the restraint in him, how he was trying to hold himself back. But it was too late. He'd already crossed that line. We paused only long enough to breathe, our foreheads touching, breaths heavy and uneven. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my palm, thudding fast. His gaze said everything. This wasn't some mistake or lapse in control. It was something he'd tried to push down for a long time, something he was only now admitting. "What do we do now?" he whispered, eyes searching mine. I gave him space, but just a little, still close enough to feel that charge between us. "I think you already know," I said quietly, with a confidence I hadn't felt in ages. "We're already past the point of no return. Why pretend otherwise?" He didn't respond right away, just stood there still battling with himself. Then, after one last glance at the door, he stepped toward me again. His hands slid around my waist, drawing me back in. This time, there was no doubt, no holding back. That afternoon slipped away in a haze. We barely left the bathroom, the pressure between us finally releasing in a way that felt both thrilling and inevitable. His hands moved over me, my waist, my back, my shoulders, with a firmness that held back just enough to stay respectful, but no more. I didn't want control, not anymore. It had been so long, since before the divorce, since I'd felt anything this real. My days had been made of routines, quiet dinners, lonely TV nights, the occasional call from one of my kids. I hadn't realized how much I missed being seen, being touched, being wanted. Jacob kissed me again, harder this time, his lips moving down my neck. His hands gripped my hips and I gasped, my head tipping back as I surrendered completely. There was something intoxicating about his presence, young, powerful, and seeing something in me no one had in years. It was more than just wanting him. It was a connection that cut through everything else, something deeper than either of us anticipated but couldn't ignore. Eventually, we ended up in the bedroom, the atmosphere charged with a kind of electricity I hadn't felt in ages. As we lay together wrapped in the sheets, I found myself smiling. feeling more alive than I had in what felt like forever. "I've never done anything like this before," Jacob said quietly, his voice rough and low, lying next to me, his fingers lazily drawing patterns on my arm. "Me neither," I admitted just as softly. He looked at me, his face showing an emotion I didn't expect, uncertainty. "I probably shouldn't have," he added, shaking his head slightly. "But I don't feel sorry about it." I rested my palm on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my touch, and gave a gentle smile. "Neither do I." We stayed quiet after that, each of us caught up in our own thoughts, the weight of what had just occurred lingering in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like we had stepped over some invisible boundary neither of us knew existed, and now that we had, neither of us wanted to step back. After a while, Jacob sat up and glanced at the clock. "I should get going," he said, his tone tinged with a reluctance that echoed mine. "I've been here longer than I planned." "You don't have to," I replied, even though I knew he couldn't stay. He paused, looking like he wished he could remain, then shook his head. I don't want this to get weird," he said, his tone soft but steady. "I don't want you to think I was just, you know." I smiled, understanding what he meant. "I don't," I said, sitting up beside him. "You're a good guy, Jacob. We both needed this, and I'm glad it happened, but I'm not expecting anything beyond this." He looked somewhat comforted, though I could see a bit of uncertainty in his gaze, like he wasn't used to things being that straightforward. "So, you're really okay with all of it? No strange emotions or anything?" I chuckled gently, shaking my head. "No, Jacob. No strange emotions. It was just one of those experiences. No commitments, no pressure." He nodded slowly, like he was still trying to believe it could be that easy. "All right," he said after a pause. "I guess I'll see you around." "Maybe," I replied playfully. "If my sink acts up again, you'll be the first one I call." That made him grin. He stood, picked up his tools and slung his bag over his shoulder. Before heading out, he turned around one last time. "Margaret," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I don't regret it. I want you to know that." I smiled, watching him as he opened the door. "Neither do I." And just like that, he was gone. In the days that followed, I caught myself thinking about Jacob more often than I probably should have. Each time I passed the sink, I remembered how he had looked at me, the slight shake in his hands when I'd touched his arm. I remembered the heat in his kiss, the way his body had pressed against mine, how he'd paused and then finally given in. It had been such a long time since I'd felt that way, since I'd felt anything like that. I didn't really think he'd call again. I assumed he had probably decided it was a one-time thing, something that shouldn't happen again. And maybe he was right. Maybe it never should have happened at all, but I didn't regret it, not one bit. Still, I wasn't sure if I'd ever see him again. I couldn't even say for certain if I wanted to. The practical side of me knew this could get complicated, the age gap, the imbalance, society's judgment, and the very real chance we were tempting fate. But the part of me that had felt alive in his embrace didn't care about any of that. I knew if he reached out, I wouldn't turn him away. Then, one afternoon about a week after he left, my phone rang. Seeing his name on the screen made my heart skip. I hadn't expected it, not even hoped for it, but there it was. His name, his number, a path back to what we had shared. "Hey," he said, his tone uncertain, almost shy, as if unsure whether he should be calling. "I just wanted to check on the faucet, make sure everything's still okay." There was a pause, and I could hear the doubt in his voice, like he was trying to convince himself this was still a professional check-in, but we both knew better. "The faucet's fine," I replied, my voice dropping slightly, just enough to hint that I wasn't really talking about plumbing. "But there's another thing you might be able to help with." Another pause. I could practically hear the beat of his heart on the line, the hesitation signaling that he was weighing the decision, whether or not to come back. "I'll be there in an hour," Jacob said, his voice barely audible, like he wasn't sure he believed what he was agreeing to. But I knew, deep down, he couldn't stay away any more than I could stop myself from inviting him. When I ended the call, a wave of excitement surged through me. It had been so long since I felt that mix of nerves and anticipation, of need and adrenaline rushing through me like a current. I told myself it was just a passing thrill. Nothing serious, nothing lasting. But the truth was, it already meant more than that. I spent the next hour pacing around my home, straightening up things that didn't need tidying, trying to calm the buzz building inside me. This wasn't like me. I'd never been the kind to lose control, to get swept into something so reckless. But with Jacob, all those walls I'd built up over time just collapsed. When he finally arrived, that same rush hit me again. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, but clearly drawn to whatever was pulling us together. His eyes met mine, and I saw that familiar flicker of uncertainty, but something else was there now too. Something darker, more intense. As he stepped inside, the tension between us thickened. We said little as I led him toward the bathroom, pretending there was something that needed fixing, but we both knew why he had really come back. Once the door shut behind us, the air shifted. Jacob focused on the faucet, trying to keep busy, but I saw his fingers quiver. He was uneasy, but so was I. Uneasy about what we were doing, and even more so about how badly I wanted it. I moved closer, watching him pretend to tinker with the faucet, his posture stiff, his attention fixed. The silence between us grew heavy, dense with what neither of us said. I couldn't take it anymore. I reached out, resting my hand gently on his shoulder, feeling his warmth through the fabric. Jacob froze. His whole body went still, like he couldn't even breathe. Then, slowly, he turned to face me, that same inner battle in his eyes. "Jacob," I whispered, my tone low but certain. "You don't have to act like nothing's happening." His breath caught in his throat, and for a second I thought he might pull away again, leave like before. But then I saw something change in him. His face softened, his resistance breaking down. And then, without speaking, he pulled me into him, kissing me so hard it stole the breath from my lungs. This time was different. No doubts, no hesitation. Jacob wasn't holding back anymore. His hands moved over me with an urgency that made my whole body shiver. I kissed him back. My fingers tangled in his hair as I pulled him closer, letting the moment overtake me completely. We didn't pause this time. The bathroom felt far too cramped for what was unfolding between us. Without interrupting the kiss, Jacob picked me up and carried me into the bedroom, where every wall we'd built between us seemed to disappear. The time that followed was a hazy mix of feeling and sensation, the world outside vanishing as we gave in to the pull we'd tried to ignore for so long. Jacob's hands roamed my body with a kind of awe, a hunger that matched my own. For those hours, everything else faded. I felt awake, more alive than I had in years, as though the time that had worn me down had simply fallen away. I was no longer just a woman trapped in routine and silence, wandering a big, empty home. With Jacob, I felt needed, desired. There was no shame, no guilt, just the heat between us and a silent agreement that we both craved this. Jacob's touch was soft and assertive all at once, a perfect blend of command and surrender. He kissed me with a kind of urgency I hadn't expected, his mouth moving over mine with such intensity that it made my chest tighten. I returned the kiss just as fiercely, holding him close, unwilling to let the moment slip from my grasp. When we finally lay together, exhausted and still, the silence that filled the space was soothing instead of awkward. I could feel Jacob's steady breath against my skin as his fingers traced lazy paths across my body. I shut my eyes, soaking in his warmth, the solid weight of his presence beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. There wasn't any need. We both understood that what had passed between us was more than just a passing urge. It was something unexpected but undeniable. For the first time in ages, I felt truly noticed. Not as a sick woman nearing old age, not as someone's former partner, but as a woman who could still want, still feel, still live. Yet no matter how hard you try to hold on to something, reality finds its way back in. As the hours moved on, the truth of what we'd done began to settle around me. Jacob was young, so much younger than me. While age hadn't seemed like a problem when we were wrapped up in each other, I knew deep down that we couldn't ignore it forever. I looked at him, still lying there with his eyes closed, breathing evenly, and wondered how long this sense of calm would last. How soon before he realized how complicated things really were. How soon before he began to retreat. The fear crept in slowly. I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. I hadn't intended to feel more than a fleeting spark. But now, lying next to him, I recognized the truth. I was more attached to him than I ever planned to be. Carefully, I sat up, trying not to disturb him, and pulled the blanket around me. I gazed out the window, watching as the final light of day dipped behind the trees, casting a warm golden hue over the room. I knew this couldn't last. The logical part of me understood that what we had was temporary, that it would fade. But another part, one I hadn't let myself feel until now, wanted it to continue. Wanted him to stay. And that terrified me. In the days that followed, I moved through a strange blend of hope and uncertainty. Jacob still came around, but something between us had shifted. He remained gentle, attentive. But there was a growing distance, an invisible strain we both sensed but never named. I don't think it was deliberate. He was trying to keep things together. Still, I could read the worry in his eyes whenever we were close. He had so much of his life ahead of him. I couldn't help but wonder if he was starting to second-guess everything. What once felt exciting, the age gap, the secrecy, now hung over us like a dark cloud. I noticed the way people stared when we were together, the raised brows, the looks that lingered a little too long. It didn't matter that he made me feel younger, more alive than I'd felt in years. To the rest of the world, we looked wrong, like we didn't belong together. Little by little, the weight of those judgments started to press on me. One evening, while we sat quietly on the couch, Jacob reached over and took my hand. His touch was warm, reassuring, but in his eyes, I saw something that made my heart tighten. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, his tone uncertain, like he didn't quite know where to begin. "About us." I felt my chest tighten, but I gave a small nod, silently encouraging him to go on. "This isn't easy, Margaret," he continued, voice quiet but steady. "I don't regret anything, but I'm not sure how we make this work." I understood instantly. I'd been waiting for this, dreading it. We had stepped over a line, and now we were both trying to make sense of where we stood. "You don't need to explain," I said, keeping my voice even despite the pounding of my heart. "I get it. This isn't simple." Jacob looked at me, and in his expression was a sadness I hadn't braced for. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, "but I can't keep pretending this is normal." His words hit me hard, but I stayed composed. I had expected this moment. I had known our foundation was fragile, that we couldn't hold it together forever. But that didn't make it hurt any less. After that night, things began to slowly fall apart. We still saw each other, but the warmth between us was fading, replaced by a quiet discomfort that wouldn't go away. I felt Jacob distancing himself, even as he tried not to. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. Scared of losing him, scared of going back to what my life had been before. The lonely hours, the silence that filled my home, it all felt unbearable now, after the time we'd shared. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, staring at my phone, silently hoping it would ring. Jacob had said he'd stop by earlier, but the day had come and gone without a word. The anxiety in my chest tightened. He was slipping away and I didn't know how to hold on. Then, after what felt like ages, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jacob. "I'm sorry. I can't come tonight. I need some time to think." I stared at the words, my heart sinking. I had known this was coming, but seeing it in front of me made it feel final. I didn't write back. I didn't have the words. Instead, I sat in the dim light, the quiet pressing in around me like a weight I couldn't lift. The thrill I had once felt was gone, replaced by a hollow space I hadn't anticipated. I thought this would be a brief escape, a moment to feel something before moving on, but it had grown into something else. I had let myself feel, let myself care. And now I was facing the cost. A week slipped by with no word from him. I tried to stay occupied, throwing myself into errands and tasks that didn't matter. But the emptiness stayed close, following me like a shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that something important was ending, slipping out of reach no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, my phone rang. It was Jacob. "Can I come over?" he asked, his voice low and unsure. "Of course," I replied. I answered, even though deep down I already sensed what was coming. When he got there, something between us had shifted. An unease hung in the room that hadn't been there before. He looked worn out, like sleep had been escaping him for days, and the tension was written all over his face. We sat together in the living room, the silence between us thick with all the words we weren't saying. I waited for him to speak, but he seemed to be searching for the right way to start. "Margaret," he said gently, "I've been thinking a lot lately." I gave a small nod, my chest tight with nerves. "I care about you," he went on, meeting my gaze, "more than I expected to. But I can't keep pretending the age gap doesn't matter. I can't act like this isn't messy." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away, refusing to break. I had expected this, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. "I get it," I whispered. He looked at me, his face full of sorrow. "I don't want to hurt you, Margaret, but I think we should stop this before it becomes harder." I nodded again, though words wouldn't come. I'd always known this couldn't go on forever, but knowing didn't soften the pain. Jacob reached for my hand and held it gently like he wanted to comfort me, even though it didn't help much. His hand was warm, familiar, but felt far away, like a memory fading too fast. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and full of feeling. "I never meant to let it get this far, but I don't see a way forward." I looked at him, my heart quietly breaking. He was right. We had stepped into something that once felt thrilling, but now reality was sinking in hard. The age gap, the secrecy, the uncertainty of what we were doing. It was all too much. "I don't regret it," I said softly, keeping my voice even, despite the ache in my throat. "I don't want you thinking I do." His expression softened, and for a second I thought he might change his mind, but then it passed. "I don't either," he said almost in a whisper. "But I can't keep pretending this is more than what it is." I nodded again, accepting the truth we both knew. What we shared had been real, had been something special, but it wasn't meant to go on. That truth hurt the most, realizing that even something powerful can still be temporary. We stayed like that for a while, quiet, his hand still holding mine. It felt like we were both clinging to what little was left, even though it was already slipping away. Eventually, Jacob stood up slowly, like he needed the extra time to let it all sink in. He looked around the room as though trying to take a mental picture, then turned back to me. "Take care of yourself, Margaret," he said quietly. "You too, Jacob," I replied, my voice steady but heavy with everything left unsaid. He stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked away. I watched him leave, my heart aching in ways I hadn't expected. The door clicked shut behind him, and just like that, he was gone. After he left, the silence in the house was almost unbearable, thick like fog. I stayed seated, staring at the door, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The excitement, the closeness, the feelings, it had all been genuine. But now it was over. Slowly I got up, my limbs heavy, and went to the bedroom. The bed felt huge and too empty without him. Lying there in the darkness, I couldn't stop myself from wondering, had I gone too far? Let myself care too deeply? But even through the sadness, I knew I wouldn't take it back. What we had shared had brought something back to life in me, something I hadn't felt in years. It reminded me that I could still feel desire, still crave connection, still live fully, and for that I would always be thankful. The days that came next moved slowly, like time itself had dulled. My old routines returned, everything familiar again. But something inside me had shifted. Jacob was gone, but the fire he had lit inside me still burned, quietly but steady. I thought about him often, I wondered what he was doing, how he was feeling. I knew ending it was the right thing for both of us, but that didn't stop the missing. It stuck with me. A dull ache I couldn't quite shake. I tried to fill my time with chores, tidying the house, sorting books, taking long walks through the neighborhood. Still, the memories of him lingered in my thoughts, sneaking up on me when I least expected them, teasing me with what might have been. One afternoon, while flipping through old photo albums, I found a picture of myself from years ago. Young, alive, full of energy. I stared at it for a while, trying to connect that version of me to the woman I had become. I had spent so long doing what was expected, being a good wife, a good mom, responsible, steady. But somewhere along the way, I had lost a part of myself. Jacob had reminded me of that missing piece, the part of me that still wanted excitement, closeness, something real. Even though our time together was short, I couldn't help but feel grateful for it. He had shown me something I hadn't known I needed, a reminder that I was still here, still able to feel. Weeks turned into months, and the pain of missing him started to ease. It didn't vanish completely. There were still moments that caught me off guard, memories that tugged at my heart, but they happened less often. And slowly that hole inside began to fill with something new, acceptance. I realized then that what we'd had was a break from the quiet sameness of my life. A short, intense spark that helped me rediscover myself. It didn't last, but it had changed me. I felt it in the way I walked, the way I moved through my days. My house no longer felt so empty. I had found a way to take it back, to make it feel like home again. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I joined a book club, something I'd always wanted but never tried. I picked up painting, spending my afternoons blending colours, losing myself in the calm it brought. And through all of that, I kept Jacob's memory tucked quietly away. I didn't dwell on it, but I didn't block it out either. It was part of my story now, a chapter that had helped me grow into who I was becoming. One evening, many months later, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset spread across the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air was cool and crisp, a sign that fall was coming. As I sat there, I realized something I hadn't felt before. I was at peace, not just with the quiet life I had rebuilt, but with the fact that I had lived through something that changed me, that I had truly lived.